My name is Jordan Smith, and I am the voice in the astrologer for nonconformist conscience. There is an ancient myth that reflects this Pisces new moon happening on March 18th. It's about the ocean goddess Amphitrite, who drowned the world. Humanity had become arrogant, taking from the earth, exploiting the ocean, and disconnecting from consciousness itself. And she sent warnings, but they were ignored, and so the ocean rose. And when the destruction became too great, Zeus forced her to retreat into the depths of the sea. Before disappearing, she left behind a message, and it is one that I want each one of us to connect with during this new moon. And that message was the ocean remembers. This new moon is happening at 28 degrees Pisces. It is ruled by Neptune and Aries. And this new moon is also sextile Uranus and Taurus. There's a lot to do with natural resources and our own consciousness and the collective unconscious and the collective individuated unconscious. The collective consciousness is seen in Pisces, Neptune, and the collective individuated unconscious is seen in Aquarius, Uranus. Pluto is in Aquarius, and then Uranus and Taurus is sextiling this new moon. And I'm going to get into this in just a little bit, but I want us to really feel into what Pisces on an archetypal level is known for. And this is one of the most misunderstood archetypes within astrology. And so it is the collective unconscious, which I just stated. The collective unconscious is a Jungian term. It is this theory or idea of where we each are born and we inherently are connected to archetypes and memories and symbols of the past. It's why each of us dreams about some of the same archetypes. It's why we can say things and we don't really have any knowledge about it in this lifetime. And then all of a sudden we see that it's in a myth or it's playing out somewhere else. It's because we are tapped into this collective unconscious, whereas the collective individuated unconscious is how we are interfacing with that, right? And Pisces is also corresponding with myths, dreams, the dissolution of boundaries. Pisces is boundaryless. It is formless, right? Whereas Saturn, who is conjunct Neptune, is about form and boundaries. Pisces is also corresponding with spiritual perception and our natural way to spiritualize. Each one of us has our own unique way of spiritualizing. And that is seen in the chart. I've done a video about this in the past, and I will link it in the description for you if you're interested in that. It's also about compassion and initiation through surrender. It's transcendence of time, space, and reality. The best way for you to understand this is whenever you dream, your consciousness is still active, and yet the body, the form, the structure is in a resting, sleeping state, and it is transcending time, space, and reality when we're in this dream state. Pisces, Neptune also corresponds with our visions, our ideals, our fantasies. It's mythic imagery. It's our conscious perception. It's our spiritual initiation, and it can be this confusion as well. And historically, strong Pisces and Neptune symbolism often coincides with events involving oceans, oil and maritime trade, environmental issues, refugee movements across waters, spiritual awakenings connected to collective suffering. And this is because Pisces, it dissolves boundaries. It frequently brings hidden collective and personal realities to the surface, and this can show up as environmental crisis, humanitarian crisis linked to water routes, or spiritual reckonings around our relationship with nature herself and within ourself. And many of the world's major geopolitical tensions revolve around oceans and shipping routes. Some examples that we can see where this has played out is the Persian Gulf. Right now, we're seeing it, the Strait of Hormuz. We've seen it with the South China Sea, the Black Sea, the Red Sea shipping corridor. And these waters control energy flows, trade, and resources. And from a symbolic perspective, oceans become places where human power structures confront natural systems. This is fascinating to me, because a lot of this is going on right now. You know, this archetype was really reflected Saturn, Neptune still in Pisces over this past fall and summer. We saw Greta Thunberg and a group of people having a humanitarian effort, trying to send resources to those in Gaza who were suffering so that they could eat, so that they could get medical care. And right now in the Gulf of Mexico, we're seeing something play out that is not talked about right now, but it should be, which is Trump has hired the BP oil company to drill a deep water rig into the ocean in order for us to pump oil. And back in 2010, there was an oil rig by the same company, BP Oil, that drilled a 5,000-foot rig, and there was a blowout. And if you remember, it took months for it to get fixed. Millions of barrels of oil were expelled into the ocean. And what we learned from this, and by the way, multiple men lost their lives on this oil rig. But what we learned was that BP did not, they did not have safety precautions. They didn't even know how to fix this. It was actually Obama and a physicist who was, in his cabinet who was able to fix this. So it's important for us to take note on this, especially with Mercury retrograde, and this is coming out, that we're revisiting this dynamic of crude oil being Neptune Pisces because it is the pure form of oil and gas, all right? But we're seeing this come back around, and you know, uh, what are the repercussions and the consequences of this? So, many earlier goddesses represented cosmic forces themselves, and they weren't rulers over them. Some examples of this were Gaia, or is Gaia, the earth, Nyx, the night, Tethys, primordial waters, Amphitrite, who I'm really going to dive into on a collective and personal level with this new moon, the conscious ocean, and Selene, the moon. So in later patriarchal structures, they tended to convert these forces into wives or secondary figures, while the male gods became the rulers. And one way we see this, and that there's a difference though, is that we've all come to know, and I'll be talking about this, is that Poseidon, he was the ruler of the sea, but he never was the sea, whereas Amphitrite, she was the embodiment of the ocean. So the key players during this new moon that I want to take you through a journey of, so we can really consciously connect with this new moon, that is linking to this past 19 and a half year SAROS cycle, dealing with the eclipses that we just had, is the key players seen in asteroids is Amphitrite. She's at 13 degrees Sagittarius, squaring Mars in Pisces. Then we have Vesta and Medusa in Pisces conjunct Mercury retrograde and the lunar north node, while also sextiling Cassandra in Taurus, who is ruled by Venus in Aries. So, let me take you on this journey and tell you the story of Amphitrite. Some people pronounce her name Amphitrite. I talked to my friend who lives in Cyprus and I double checked with her and asked her, is the correct pronunciation Amphitrite? And she said yes, only she did it with a much more beautiful accent than I can. And I am from Oklahoma, and I'm not even going to attempt to try to do that because it will sound so weird. But in the earliest traditions, Amphitrite was not simply the consort of Poseidon. She was known as his wife, but this was not just what she was known for. That came later. She was far more ancient than many of the Olympian gods themselves, and this included Zeus. And she was representing the living consciousness of the ocean, the vast intelligence surrounding the world and connecting all life. Her very name carries a profound meaning. At the root word of her name, it means all around on both sides. And the adjective linked to her root word is the third, and then the verb with that coinciding with that is to pierce. So symbolically, it speaks to the ocean of consciousness that surrounds us and the inner perception we access when awareness pierces beyond ordinary sight, the direct perception found in what some people call accessing the third eye. According to the myth, humanity had grown very arrogant. They had taken from the earth and the sea without reverence, without restraint, and without remembering their place within the greater web of life. And Amphitrite warned them. She sent them signs. She stilled the waters. Fish went away. And yet no one heeded the warnings that she sent out. She even went to Olympus and asked for intervention, but the gods loved that mortals worshipped them. They had even grown in their hubris, right? And she sent these signs and omens through the waters, but these warnings, like I said, they were ignored. And so the ocean rose and the waters began to swallow the world after she willed it with her own conscious connection with the ocean. And she didn't do this out of cruelty, but as a response to humanity's disconnection from the natural order. We see this in other myths like, Noah's Ark and such. Okay, this is linked to that, the Great Flood. But once she did this, Zeus eventually intervened. He was upset that Amphitrite had not listened to him whenever she went to him for help. And he warned her that if destruction continued, he would boil the ocean with his lightning until nothing remained. And Amphitrite, recognizing the gravity of the threat, she stopped. She released from her consciousness and willed the ocean to settle. And Zeus told her that because of her rebellion in his eyes, right, that if she didn't retreat or withdraw and go to the depths of the sea, that he was going to make sure that the earth would become a desert. And she loved the consciousness of the ocean so much that she did retreat and she went to the depths of the ocean. Before she left, Zeus made a final promise as a consequence of, again, like I said, what he deemed her rebellion. And it was to make sure that humanity forgot her and her ancient wisdom. Why do you think that most of us have never heard of her? But before she disappeared, she spoke a truth that echoes through time, and she said, "The ocean remembers." Later myths attempted to erase her story, placing Poseidon as the ruler of the sea, fulfilling Zeus's promise of erasure of her, the erasure of our connection of consciousness itself, the erasure of our ability to connect and remember our connection with the consciousness of all types of consciousness. Yet Poseidon himself once pursued Amphitrite whenever he first saw her. She fled from him. He had seen her dancing with her sisters, and he wanted her, and she wanted to remain whole and free and not linked to a husband. And that is why she fled. And she retreated far away to the Atlas Mountains. And Poseidon, unable to find her, sent a dolphin named Delphinus, a gentle and empathetic messenger who eventually located her and spoke to her with kindness and understanding. And through Delphinus, Amphitrite was persuaded to return. The dolphin would later become placed among the stars as the constellation Delphinus, a reminder that compassion and empathy often guide us back to the depths of truth. And despite the destructive myth that surrounds her, Amphitrite was also known for her compassion and her wisdom. One story tells of the hero Theseus, who fell into the ocean during a dangerous journey. And instead of allowing him to drown, Amphitrite received him in the depths of the sea, and she revealed to him this beauty of the underwater world, the mysterious realms beneath the surface that many would normally fear. And in this way, she became a guide, showing that what we often call darkness within our consciousness or shadow may contain immense beauty and understanding. And this was so profound to Theseus. Once Theseus had witnessed these depths, Amphitrite ensured that he would safely return to the surface and continue his journey in a safe passage. So, archetypally, her story reflects something profound about consciousness itself. When we feel as though we are drowning, just like Theseus did, overwhelmed by the depths of life and the descent, it's the descent is actually a passageway to become an initiation. And for those who approach the depths within their consciousness with sincerity and courage, the ocean can become a teacher, just like Amphitrite did. And Amphitrite, she represents that guiding intelligence of the deep. She symbolizes the awakening of our direct inner perception and what many traditions call the opening of the third eye, the ability to perceive truth beyond the surface of appearances. And when we return from those depths, we often rise with a new understanding of ourselves and of the world and of the living consciousness that surrounds ourselves. And this is really interesting because Delphinius, linked with this story, adds another layer to this because dolphins were often seen in ancient traditions as guides through the ocean, and they were creatures that help those who have fallen into the water find their way back to safety. We see this when we hear of stories of Atlantis and those who did survive it. It was the dolphins that took them on a safe passage to land. So symbolically, the dolphin represents something important about consciousness itself. It moves between the surface and the depths with ease, just as we move between waking awareness and the deeper ocean of the unconscious. This is seen when dolphins they break the sea and they jump and then they dive back in. So it's this ability to dip in and out of consciousness, right? And so it's interesting because the dolphin that persuaded Amphitrite shares its name with one of the most sacred prophetic sites of the ancient world, Delphi. The word Delphic still means mysterious or prophetic insight. This is where we have the Oracle of Delphi comes into place as well. But the deeper root of the word Delphi comes from the Greek word for womb. Symbolically, this suggests a place where hidden knowledge emerges into awareness, the cosmic wound of consciousness, perhaps, right? Just as life emerges from the womb, insight emerges from the depths of our consciousness that is connected to all forms of consciousness, very Piscean and Neptunian. And the dolphin in Amphitrite's story, therefore, represents more than compassion. It represents guidance through the depths of the unconscious, where direct perception and deeper understanding can arise. And there's also a cross-cultural reference here. Under this Pisces new moon, the symbolism reminds us that the ocean of consciousness may be the very place where true perception begins. So when we look across cultures, we find that many ancient traditions carry stories about water rising when humanity forgets its relationship with the earth and the consciousness linked to earth, which is linked to us. Whether it appears in Mesopotamian myth, Hindu cosmology, indigenous traditions, or Greek stories like Amphitrite, the symbolism throughout all is very remarkably similar. Water becomes the great remembering force. In astrology, Pisces represents the same oceanic field of consciousness, the place where cycles dissolve and the deeper memory of life remains if we choose to remember. Perhaps that is why the myth of Amphitrite ends with such a haunting truth. Even when humanity forgets, the ocean remembers. This is so important and profound right now. Before I get into some of these other archetypes, I just want to say back in 2007, when this SAROS cycle started, we have right now this new moon happening at 28 degrees Pisces. This lunation is whereas the Aquarius solar eclipse was reflecting a new karmic cycle and planting the seeds of what that cycle was representing. And then we had the Virgo lunar eclipse, indicative of what we were working on to close karmic chapters. This Pisces new moon is where we see us putting both into action, and it is a larger process that links back to these eclipses that started way back in 2006. But the eclipses from 2006 up until the ones that we just had were a longer evolutionary cycle linked to this SAROS cycle. And back in 2007, we had a Pisces solar eclipse in February, but that Pisces solar eclipse was at 28 degrees. And when this was happening, we had a lot of things going on pertaining to the Persian Gulf and also Iraq, and a lot of naval activity happening at the time. We also had things linked to the G7 summit and dealing with natural resources and the global crisis with global warming happening. So these resources and maritime activity really highlighted during that time. Then we had, so that eclipse was at 28 Pisces. And then in 2014, February or March, again, I think I might have this backwards, we had another eclipse happen in Pisces at 8 degrees. And that's important because this new moon is linking to that time period as well, because we have the lunar north node and Mercury retrograde at 8 degrees Pisces. So there's this deeper story. And really, what is this asking us on a collective level? Have we heeded the warnings? Just like Amphitrite in her story sent out warnings of our own hubris on a humanitarian level. Do we remember, just like the consciousness of the ocean remembers? How are we individually connecting with our own consciousness? How are we interfacing with the formlessness and the form? Are we getting stuck in thinking, Virgo, and judgments, Saturn? When we are interacting with the collective unconscious in our daily life through overanalyzing and our own judgments, we're not really remembering the formless timelessness held within the consciousness itself. We're not able to connect with others on a deep, vast level because our interface is only with them at the level of form and not the formlessness, meaning we're not connecting on a soul level. We're connecting on a mental level. And that is part of this Virgo dynamic that's happening. And with Mercury, the ruler of the lunar south node in Virgo, conjunct the north node and Vesta and Medusa, there is this need to recover retrograde, to resolve retrograde, the remembering of what it means to connect on a conscious level, in a formless level with others. When we are connecting with people through form, Saturn, and this formlessness slash form that I'm talking about is really indicative of this Saturn-Neptune conjunction as well. What do I mean by this? Okay, so a lot was coming to me the other day about the collective unconscious and then how we interface with this and how most of us are disconnected, and that's why we feel the anxiety. And we know that there's a lot going on and there's this global crisis, Virgo, and yet there's this confusion and this over anxiety about everything because we're stuck in the mental, we're stuck in the form. And we're really needing on a collective and individual levels to connect to something much deeper, to our essence, Pisces, of the formlessness. That can feel like losing control, right? And that is very hard for humans. But I was having a lot come to me about this, and we even see this with Pluto in Aquarius. Aquarius represents the collective individuated unconscious. It is sextiling Saturn and Neptune, and it perfects its sextile to Saturn in just a couple of days. But when we're connecting on a mental level just to form, Saturn, to structure, it is deeply mental. It means whenever I am connecting to a friend, a loved one, to my animals, or to my environment, we can see this show up where we're just thinking about what it is that we like about someone, what we don't like about someone. We're thinking about this categorical list of all of these things, right? Very Virgo, Mercury of I'm just gonna make up a name. I like Jen. Jen has the same values as me, and I like the way she talks and da 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 da. That's not really connecting with the essence of Jen, though, right? Where I'm meeting her in a compassionate, soulful, I see you deeply way because I'm just connected to her form, her structure. We see this when we are attracted to someone, right? Our first initial response with attraction is to connect with the form, the structure of who someone is, not on a soul conscious level. It's, oh my God, that person is so fucking hot. That person is, oh my gosh, there's something about them. And it's like, because it's the gaze, right? It's how we're viewing them. And then we're not connecting to the essence of them. We're not tapping into how we're connected on a deeper, unconscious, soulful level. So I was thinking about all of this and I was like, I understand this because it's in my consciousness, but how do I want to disseminate and talk about this regarding this Pisces new moon? Because I feel like this is very important for us to understand with this new cycle that's starting for us. And I had this desire to be able to talk about this in a way that could be more tangible, right? Um, and it was a sincere desire. Coincidentally, later on in the evening, after I cooked dinner and I settled down, I was doing prayer and meditation and really, and then I was journaling and writing down things that were coming up for me as well. I decided to get on YouTube and I forget what I typed in, and I'm gonna link this video to this in a minute. But I found a talk with Ram Dass and Eckhart Tolle, and immediately they're talking about form and formlessness. And Eckhart Tolle, he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said, the best way to know that we're in this mental state and we're not connecting with the formless, meaning we're not experiencing actual true love that's encompassing, we're experiencing it more as an action, or as a response to something that we are projecting thinking or categories or definitions onto something, which is really, it creates this boundary to really access the deeper levels of love. He said, think about when you have a dog and you love this dog and you feel the pure emotion of this dog, very Piscean, by the way, and the dog dies and you see the dog and it's dead and you see its fur and you see its body and you're able to touch it. And yet, in that moment that that is just its form. You know that the essence of that dog has left. And therefore, when you are holding this dog or taking it to, get buried, it's the memories you're recalling of its formless nature, its consciousness, its soul that you're thinking about. You are not thinking as you're holding the dog, I just love this form. You know that the consciousness is gone. And so this deeper layer of this new moon is how are we interfacing with humanity, with our relationships on a conscious level? Are we remembering the ocean within and within others that is all interconnected? Or are we staying at this more cerebral place of form? And to me, this is very powerful and potent because a lot of the issues that we're having and the humanitarian crisis we're having is because it's this cerebral approach to form. We're putting too much value on form. We are not connecting with the soul and the essence of what it is that we're needing to connect with. And yet, the ocean remembers. It has never forgotten. Our soul remembers. Our ego may be getting caught up in this other dynamic. And so Pluto and Aquarius sextile Saturn, Neptune. Saturn, form, structure, boundaries. Neptune, the formless, the conscious, the ocean. Pluto, the soul. Aquarius, the individuated unconscious, which is where we connect with the collective unconscious. It's where we're interfacing. The majority of people are kind of in this herd mentality connected to the collective unconscious, right? And it's really easy for some of us who have more expansive consciousness. Doesn't mean we're better than and they're less than. It just means that it's different. But this is where we can feel this nebulous confusion sometimes. And it's like, are these emotions mine or are they like what I'm picking up on through my environment, the moon, right? And that's actually where you're tapping into the collective unconscious. And yet, this new moon is also sextiling Uranus and Taurus. This again is the individuated unconscious. How are you observing your connection through your own independent individual reality, or are you getting lost in the sauce? Are you like not even connecting to your awareness about our interconnection, right? Are you, because of the intense emotional dynamics coming up in the collective unconscious, are you getting confused? Are you staying more in the cerebral type of place? Is that linked to some of the anxieties that you're having? Because Saturn Neptune is already an anxiety inducing, especially in Aries, but then you got a sextile to a Pluto and Aquarius, which really accelerates the nervous system. Feels like there's this stripping down whenever we don't stay in this objective awareness. And this new moon, it's sextiling the ruler of Pluto, right? It is really asking for us to create and cultivate and ground Taurus into a more objective approach around our own consciousness and the consciousness that we are interfacing with right now, so we can see clearly, so we can remember, right? And that can help eliminate some of these anxieties. It's also, there's so much fear being brought up with the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries, and especially being linked to Pluto right now in Aquarius. Can you sit with your fears? The moon sextiling Uranus and Taurus. How are you cultivating a sense of inner validation, moon, nurturance, moon, through the grounding into what is going on? Are you able to stay present? Are you able to observe and see what is clearly yours or not yours? Or are you overwhelmed and inundated by the feelings, Taurus, that are coming through the collective unconscious? And then that is really tapping into the mental. So this is where we're finding on a collective level, this need to be able to sit with the anxiety and the fears. This is hard. Like, I've even had this come up for myself, especially Uranus and Taurus. It's like this survival, right? And then we have Venus and Aries that is ruling Uranus and Taurus, and that Aries, the fears around survival. Like, am I going to be able to survive? Can I pay my bills? Can I afford groceries for my kids? I have so many friends, and I even had to do this myself in the past, having to go to food pantries or do things to provide. And it's this weird feeling as well because it's like you can live in a house and you could have even bought a house. And yet, how things are in the world, it's like you bought a house or you have a roof over your head, and some people don't, right? And yet, you're finding yourself like interfacing with this dynamic of, but I can't even provide food right now because of what's going on. Um, or even these fears around, um, is this, for some people, it can bring up relational dynamics. Is this gonna last? Is this okay? It can even be our relationship with, humanity itself, these deep fears of what's gonna happen. Because there's a lot of scary stuff going on right now. And yet, like, there's this call to not stay in the cerebral, but to truly ground into the consciousness, the ocean of our consciousness right now, and the vast consciousness of humanity itself, but in a responsible way. Saturn conjunct Neptune. And so, this is a way that we can utilize this energy to nurture and also continue our evolutionary journey. I'm also not saying that this is where, like, if you do this and it's just you need to meditate and you need to da 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 and to objectify and to stay grounded, that's gonna go away. That's would be a lie. I would be deceiving you. It's about, I talked about this with my conversation with Jessica Lanyadu. When we were talking about this, and I told her this makes me think of this quote that I often say by Mike Tyson, which is, you can't get rid of the fear, but you can ride the wave of the fear. That is very much this Neptune and Aries dynamic. The other thing I want to say is, Lucifer retrograde is hanging out on this lunar south node, and this can really get us into the cerebral area and create a lot of anxiety and overwhelm, sparking our deepest fears, keeping us stuck in a place of confusion. I had this experience last week. I have Lucifer, it is transiting my lunar south node as well. And it's trining all of these Capricorn placements I have in the eighth house. And anyway, Lucifer is a tricky motherfucker, okay? On the one hand, yeah, it can be the bearer of light, and I will tell you, it did end up becoming that for me, with what I'm about to tell you. But it is tricky because it hits you where you are the most vulnerably tender, right? That's that malevolence. It doesn't want you to accelerate your evolutionary growth. It wants you to stay in this place. And with it being in Virgo, it can be this paralysis and this inaction, or it can be even this like criticism. So I had this experience last week. My kid, for the past 2 weeks, my oldest kid, both of my kids go to two different schools, and their schools are about 20 minutes away from where we live. And I'm a single mom, and I'm working and I'm trying to put out content, and I am a human and I want to survive, and I'm pretty much the sole provider for my two kids. I just moved to Massachusetts for community, but it's a much higher, it's more expensive than in Oklahoma where I was living. And last week, well, for the past 2 weeks, my oldest kid, their school had a play. So there was this production. And every single day, and oh, God bless my 17-year-olds because they were worn out. And so was I. But they had to go to school, be there from 8:30 to 6 o'clock every single day. And then on the weekends, it was from 9:30 to 11, and then going to pick them up. And then uh, they get a break, and then they had to go back up there from 1 to 6 p.m. And then this past weekend, same thing, only it was from 8:30 p.m. So I was driving, and in my car, Mercury, ruling Virgo, um, so much. I was spending over 3 hours a day driving back and forth between their school, my other kids' school, and my home. And I started to get really anxious about my work and survival and not knowing if I could make enough money and all of these things kind of not kind of it's linking to, Uranus and Taurus and this Saturn Neptune conjunction and Pluto, like massive anxiety around survival, Taurus, fear, Aries. And what I did is I was pushing myself to work harder to the point of exhaustion, Virgo. And the experience I was feeling, and it's the irony is I've been talking about these things, and this is how Lucifer can come in. I'd been talking about these things. I thought that I was really paying attention, and it was a thing with my child and their school that really sparked this. And it's even the archetype of like cars. Like this is wild to me how astrology plays out. I digress though. So by the end of the weekend, my fears and anxieties were turning into anger. And on top of it, I was watching my kid be exhausted as well. And then I was trying to push my limits, Aries, to work and realizing that I wasn't getting done a lot of the things that I was supposed to do, even though I was working way more. And it's because I was stuck in this Virgo place of doing this and then doing this and then having to do this and da 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 da. And then I started to get really hard on myself, critical, Virgo. Like, why am I not being able to do this? And like, what are the repercussions of this? And just complete Virgo committee upstairs. And that turned into anger, right? Like, I wasn't angry towards anyone outwardly, but what I did because I was being so critical of myself, like, why aren't you're not doing enough? And I was feeling guilt. I'm not spending enough time with my kids and da 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 and la 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 la. And I was pissed off at the school because I thought, like, these kids are working so freaking much. This is too much. And you're not looking at like single parents and really starting to become outwardly critical too, like thinking about this. So very cerebral, only interfacing with form and structures, right? And also, two things can be true. My feelings were absolutely valid, but here's the thing. with this Lucifer energy, especially on the lunar south node, it can heighten this, and you don't even realize that you're stuck in this like tornado of cerebral thoughts, right? And you're like, why am I not doing enough? And or for some people, it can even be, why do I think I can even do this? So even having these doubts, I started to have doubts, like, can I do this? And then I had to ground and sit and connect back in, and it was so hard. Usually it's pretty easy for me to connect and to center. It was so hard because my anxiety was so frenetic that even trying to meditate, very Virgo, I was struggling. And then all of a sudden, I had this awareness about this Lucifer energy that, oh my gosh, I set out to do this, and I find myself on in a whole other place. And my mental health is kind of crashing, not crashing, that's pretty over dramatic, but it felt very traumatized at the moment. And I was like, I don't even know if I can cry, and I feel like I need to cry, and like, am I gonna survive? And it was once I grounded and I was able, it took a conscious effort to really tap in, and I had to pause and force myself to do it because it was like, even then, it was like, no, keep doing more. I went back to this understanding and this awareness that I am going to be okay. I have a sincere desire to be able to do this work, to provide for my children, and I'm always going to be given enough. And I know that because I've seen it happen every single time. And that is my trust and my faith and source and my own inner listening to that. And I have experienced it every time. It's not something that's not tangible. Like, I've experienced it time and time again. And yet, even though I have, I got caught up in this tornado of this cerebral kind of ugh. And so this is these energies, and it's also asking for us to remember how to connect deeply within our consciousness and tap into our spiritual relationships as well. Pisces New Moon, whatever that looks like for you. I want us to really have an awareness about these things. And how Lucifer became the bearer of light is because whenever I stopped for a moment and got present, what I've been talking about, I took my own advice. I was able to reconnect and recenter. And so I was able to tap back into my consciousness and not stay within the form, right? So this is something I really wanted to speak about because it's just so pronounced right now. I talked to so many people that are experiencing similar things, and it's important to take care of yourself right now and to understand your own limits, and then to not feel guilty for not pushing yourself, because we're not here to be exhausted and to be frazzled. We can't be helpful if we're exhausted and frazzled. We've got to take care of ourselves. I even was reminded of this past week, and a friend came over to bring some stuff over, and I've got a herniated disc, and I had a torn rotator cuff from moving, and my herniated disc is like affecting my hand to the point of my fingers have been going numb, and it's been radiating up my arm, and then I haven't been able to like sweep my house. And when she came over, I was like, listen, you're like family to me. I haven't been able to sweep. But she understood. And whenever she left, she was like, I want you to take care of yourself. And that was such a good reminder. You're right. I know this, and I need to take care of myself. But it's the fear and these tender areas that can get us trapped and disconnected from this principle of remembering why we're really here, right? And then executing it in a healthy, constructive, nurturing way. All right. So the other things that I really want to speak to that I feel are highlighted within this lunation is Vesta and Medusa. They are conjunct in the sign of Pisces, and there are overlaps with both of them connected to Amphitrite and to Cassandra. So the Vestals, which Vesta is named after if you didn't know, they reflect an earlier goddess form of spirituality. And some scholars have connected this, to the pre-patriarchal religious systems that existed even before the Olympian style pantheons that dominated Europe. And there's evidence that really suggests this. One of them is the Temple of Vesta. It was circular. Think of the ocean, the womb, even connecting to Delphi, right? Unlike most Roman temples, which were rectangular, the Temple of Vesta was round and it resembled ancient hut shrines and these Neolithic hearth houses in the cosmic womb, right? The shape, it may symbolize the primordial womb or earth center, and tying Vesta to very ancient earth-based worship. Now, I want you to think about how this also connects to Uranus and Taurus, so the higher intelligence Uranus of the land, right? Taurus. And the flame that Vesta represents, even in her symbol, is an internal flame. It's an extremely ancient ritual symbol. In many early cultures, the sacred fire, it represented life and the continuity of the tribe and the presence of the goddess or the spirit of the land. And in Rome, if the flame went out, it meant that the soul of the state was endangered. And there was some really fucked up shit that happened to the Vestal virgins if the flame went out, like getting buried alive or whipped in public. You can do some research on that. I've given many classes. But the Vestals, they had an unusual power for women at this time because Roman society, it was highly patriarchal. But yet the Vestas, they had privileges that no other Roman women possessed. They had legal independence. They had the ability for property ownership. They had a political influence, and they had this public authority. And a lot of historians suspect this reflects a remnant of an earlier era when priestesses held religious authority. You know, before it was only men who could be a pastor or a priest or whatever. And so the Vestals really kind of indicate a surviving fragment of a much older spiritual leadership that Rome preserved, but it was tightly controlled. And what I mean by spiritual leadership is that it reflected this natural law that everyone was equal, no matter your gender, because gender is a social construct, my friends. And I've talked about this before too, but it's very much highlighted in the Vestas. It's the paradox of virginity. The Vestals, they had to take a vow of virginity, and this is an emanation of something else, okay? In ancient sacred traditions, virgin did not mean sexually confined or inexperienced. It meant something much deeper. It meant a woman who belonged to herself and to the divine. You would see it with women who would, you know, practice spirituality and they would relate to themselves as a virgin because it was reflective of their inner connection on a conscious level to the divine. And it also reflected a spiritual autonomy and this undivided devotion to the sacred flame, Vesta. So many ancient goddesses were called virgins, despite being powerful creators. Examples of this are Athena, Artemis, Hestia, even Cassandra, and Medusa at certain points, and the list goes on and on. And this really suggests virginity was originally about the more natural form of it, and its meaning sovereignty and sacred focus, not purity policing like it is now. And the Vestas, they were the cosmic center at the time. They were tied to Rome's most sacred objects. They guarded things like the Palladium and ancient relics linked to Aeneas and Troy. And this made them the guardians of Rome's mythic destiny, right? So they were very powerful. They were not simply attendants at the temple, they were keepers of this spiritual center of the civilization. They've represented safety and nurturance and devotion. And many mythologists and historians, they have this thought that the Vestas represent this transitional moment in history. You know, earlier cultures had centered the feminine as the keeper of cosmic balance. That didn't mean that men were less than, by the way. It just meant that women played a very deep role connected to the cosmic balance. And then we saw this shift in patriarchal systems where power went to male priesthoods. And the Vestals remained as a controlled but still powerful echo of that older tradition. So, in this sense, they symbolize the inner flame and the sacred center and the still point of our awareness. So, in astrology, when we look at Vesta, we're looking at a sacred focus, a spiritual dedication, an inner fire, and sexual sovereignty and protecting what is sacred within you, your consciousness, the sacred focus of remembrance. And so, Vesta is representing the sacred flame at the center, while Pisces represents this boundless ocean of consciousness. And this is even linked to Amphitrite right now. So we've got the fire in the temple, Vesta, and water in the cosmos. All of this Pisces dynamic, we even see this reflected again with Amphitrite being in a fire sign, Sagittarius, which is indicative and reflecting natural laws that we're called to remember around this. So, fire and water can seem opposite, and archetypally, they actually describe two halves of the same mystical process. Pisces dissolves boundaries and takes us into the collective unconscious, but Vesta here is protecting the inner flame so we don't lose ourselves in these depths right now, right? It goes back to how are we connecting with the form and the formlessness? And then this leads me to Medusa, who has these overlaps with these archetypes. It's important for me to talk about these overlaps. That way we can understand things on a deeper level. Medusa is conjunct Vesta right now. As a side note, I am doing a workshop that starts on the 28th going over 5 asteroids. All right. I will link where you can sign up for this. It is $111 for over 10 hours of learning, meeting each Saturday from the 28th of March into the end of April. We meet 2 hours every Saturday from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern. I will be going over many different of these asteroids and how they're connecting right now to what's going on in the world and what they're trying to teach us individually and collectively. And if you can't make a live class, you still get the recording, you get the PDFs of each slide. And like I said, it's 5 classes over 10 hours. There's Q&As for each class. I will look at people's charts as well and answer the questions that you have and I hope to see some of you. I have a few spots left. Let's talk a little bit about Medusa. She is one that I will be teaching about. So she has a linkage to the sea. In the earliest Greek genealogies, Medusa and her sisters, who were the Gorgons, she didn't become a Gorgon until later, were born from sea deities, Phorcys and Ceto. Both were primordial sea monsters of the deep ocean, and they belong to the same ancient oceanic generation of different beings like Scylla and Echidna and Ladon. And these were not merely monsters, they were personifications of the mysterious forces of the deep sea. This is important for us to remember when we're talking about asteroid goddesses in general, or just asteroids, even if they're masculine. That's patriarchal. They represent different principles, the personification of a naturally occurring principle. Vesta, the sacred flame of devotion, sacred and spiritual sovereignty, sexual sovereignty, Amphitrite, consciousness itself, right? Those aren't women and men, they are principles described through social constructs of gender. I want you to keep this in mind because that is why the distortions have come into play, and this is a lot of what I'm going to be talking about with my workshop series. They were these personifications of mysterious forces. So Medusa's origins are literally oceanic, and originally she wasn't a land monster at all. Her name meant guardian or protectress from the Greek root meaning. And this is fascinating, especially linking with Amphitrite, because her gaze turns people to stone in the myth, which actually symbolizes something of a protective boundary or the power to halt intruders. In ancient cultures, frightening female figures, what we would consider frightening female figures, were often placed on temples and shields to ward off evil. These were amphitryapic figures. Medusa's face became the famous one, and she may have once been understood not as a villain but a sacred protector. I've talked about this a little bit before, and like I said, I'll go into this more in the class. But she was associated with water and springs, and a lot of the older traditions, Medusa's blood was said to create sacred springs. As a matter of fact, when Perseus killed her, two beings emerged from her neck. One was Pegasus and one was uh, Chrysaor. There's a lot of stories within them that connect with her principles and the embodiment of her principles. What I want to say is at the root of this, her children, Pegasus and Chrysaor, are really a sacred water source linked to, well, they are the element of water linked from the blood that dripped from her neck that birthed these beings. And so Medusa's body comes as a sacred water source linked to creativity and divine inspiration. This is very Piscean. The unconscious, when accessed through myth or initiation, becomes a spring of imagination, creativity, and prophecy. This is part of Medusa and her archetype. The story that we hear is that, and this is the overlap with Vesta, all right? Medusa was a beautiful priestess, just like Vesta's. And she was a priestess of Athena, and she was assaulted. Another link to Amphitrite. By whom? Poseidon. In Athena's temple. And instead of Athena punishing Poseidon, she punished Medusa by turning her into a monster. And this is very much a later reinterpretation, and there are symbols of her dating pre-Olympic pantheon in Libya, Africa, and Egypt that represent her as a divine wisdom, protective force and principle. And so she was recast as a monster when religious systems changed. And we see this a lot with the patriarchal pantheons when they became dominant. So goddesses were replaced then by men. Going back to how Amphitrite is the embodiment of ocean itself, but then the erasure of her and Poseidon becoming the ruler of the ocean, right? So I really want you to think about how Medusa was originally a sacred guardian spirit, later turned into a villain, but yet she's conjunct Vesta. So when Medusa is appearing in Pisces, the cosmic ocean, it can often symbolize what I was talking about earlier, especially linking to these other astrological conversations. Asteroids, they give depth to the stories that are already seen in the transits of the planets, all right? So Medusa in Pisces is old fears emerging from the unconscious Pisces, the re-examination of myths about feminine power or just principles that have become known as feminine and then distorted. And there's this call to really connect with understanding and knowing that these are principles that exist in every single one of us, not just women. If it's a goddess, it is a principle within a man. If it wasn't, we wouldn't see men who were naturally spiritual, right? They embody some of these qualities, vice versa. This can also bring up transformation of what was once demonized. And when you place Medusa with Vesta, in Pisces, this symbolism becomes even richer. All right. So you get things or an image of something like the sacred flame illuminates the face of the one who was once feared. Instead of petrification, the gaze becomes recognition. Recognition of what? The remembering of the ocean of consciousness, linking it to Amphitrite. Amphitrite. So it's the sacred flame meeting the ancient wound inside of the ocean of collective memory. Think and feel into that right now. Vesta protects the sacred flame. Medusa was originally a temple priestess before her violation. The restoration of a violated person is coming up within these archetypes, and the sacred flame illuminating what was once demonized within us that on a soul level has not been remembered until now. And together with Amphitrite, Medusa's power was in her gaze, while Amphitrite has part of her etymology being linked to the third eye through the experience of direct perception through our emotional body, pure emotion, Pisces. Both myths deal with the power of perception itself. Medusa's gaze once petrified. The awakened gaze reveals truth, while Vesta helps us to keep our inner devotion to remember right now. And this is where, with Mercury retrograde on the North Node, it can really suggest these old myths being revisited. Like I, as an example, wanted to talk about Amphitrite. Forgotten stories resurfacing, reinterpreting and remembering ancient archetypes through the collective unconscious. There's a lot of rich symbolism going on right now. We can look at it with what is happening in the world, our fears, our anxieties, the crisis, but yet we have this calling during this new moon to remember what's natural. Amphitrite in Sagittarius, these natural laws that are timeless, Pisces. Amphitrite with this new moon, no matter the frenetic energy going on and our fears, think of her like Theseus in that story. we are protected when we go to these depths and we remember, when we heed the warnings and we remember and we have a sincere intention and we have the courage, Amphitrite squaring Mars and Pisces, to go to these Piscean depths, a lot can be shown to us and remembered. And then we come back up to the surface and we are protected. Vesta and Medusa are calling for us. They are conjunct Mercury retrograde. They want us to remember. And they say they're speaking, we're protected. It's okay. They're sextiling Cassandra and Taurus, and I want to let you know that there's also this overlap. In Cassandra's myth, all of her siblings, besides her and her twin brother, had what they called the sight. They were prophetic. Cassandra and her brother fell asleep one night in the temple of Athena, and another overlap, and a snake in the middle of the night came and licked their ear and gave them the sight. And yet, because Cassandra wouldn't submit to a man, he cursed her. That no matter when she told the truth of her prophecies, of her prophetic visions, no one would ever believe her, yet they would always believe her brother Helenus. And so Cassandra can deal with this dynamic of the psychological toll that it takes on someone when you're speaking truth and no one believes you, hears you. And there can be these projections and people flipping things on you. And yet, as Cassandra evolves in someone's natal chart, it's where we learn this lesson of not to be over identified with the truth that we speak. And we learn that people can take that information and do whatever they want with it. Yet it's more about it's our job to just plant the seed. It's not our responsibility to manage the outcome of that. Even if we know that if they listened, that it would mitigate a crisis. Now, linking this to Amphitrite and the warnings, are we going to be on the other side of the Cassandra dynamic and not believing the truth? Or through the sextile from Cassandra to Medusa and Vesta, are we going to keep that sacred flame alive and to understand the truth, to listen from within the inner listening Taurus that is connected to the divinity Pisces, and knowing that there's this journey that we're on. This is also really seen with Venus and Aries, the ruler of Cassandra, square to Jupiter in Cancer, the ruler of Amphitrite. This deeper calling to act on remembering the truth, to not just believe it, but to embody it. That's very much seen also with Mars and Pisces square to Amphitrite, but also Mars and Pisces ruling Venus. So there's these repeating signatures where we have these energies that are of how we want to relate with the interface of the collective unconscious, how we need to listen from within about the inner calling of our consciousness, and to really not be afraid to dive into the depths of the ocean of our consciousness, but to also stay objective around what information it is we're taking in, what it is that we're participating and relating with. These are these Venusian energies, and to really discern how we are called to connect with these energies on an individual level, and how we are meant to cultivate a deeper truth in the remembering with this energy. This new moon represents this, and yet there is a task at hand. There's a little thing that can get in the way. Are you getting too caught up in the cerebral, within form, within structure, through your judgments, your criticisms? Where can you devote yourself to remembering and connecting inwardly? Which this is not some magical power where only certain people have access to this. This is something that really I could get on a soapbox about this, but I am so tired of hearing people, especially people in spirituality or new age. I'm the only one who has to offer you this advice. I'm the best one. I'm the all-knowing. No one else does it as good as me. That is spiritual moral superiority. And guess what? That is not in alignment with natural law, because it doesn't matter who you are. You have the ability to connect to these energies. I am not special or some authority that knows better than you. That is also this dynamic and this learning through reconnecting, especially seen with Uranus and Taurus sextiling this new moon, that each one of us has the ability to transform Uranus, our inner relationship to self, Taurus, through connecting with our consciousness on a spiritual level to remember these naturally occurring principles that exist in all of us. And by the way, Taurus has a lesson. You know you better than anyone else. I tell this to my kids all the time. Listen to yourself. You will learn more personal knowledge when you do that. And also, we can stand in our own consequences of our choices a hell of a lot better when we're listening to ourselves. Whether those consequences are negative or positive or whatever, it takes out blame, victimization, Virgo, Lucifer there, this trap that if you listen to people right now, you can hear them. They, this is the other thing, I'm seeing this play out so much, and this is why this is so important to talk about these archetypes and these nuances within the asteroids. I am seeing and having people come to me and telling me things that, I mean, for me, I'm an astrologer, so I'm hearing about other astrologers. Um, and well, I'll get there in a second. But where they're being harmful or where they're saying that they know better, they're the authority of something, or this group is bad and this group is better, or I'm better. That is not spiritual. That is cerebral. Cerebral links to hubris. That is part of Amphitrite's story and lesson that is reflected in that archetype, to heed the warnings. And here we have Uranus and Taurus in a beautiful sextile to Pisces, linked to our consciousness itself, the individuated unconscious linking to the collective unconscious. And it's reflecting that you're the authority of you, Saturn conjunct Pisces. And we need to have critical thinking and to observe, Aquarius, the information and the people that we're consuming. Just because someone sounds like an authority and is talking about spiritual jargon, look at their actions. Are they talking shit about other people? Are they creating dichotomies? Are they linked to the cerebral in a way that is, it's one thing to disseminate information, it's another to create an echo chamber and become harmful through projections. I want us to be very observant and discerning, Pisces, Virgo, about what it is we're interfacing with because there's so much of the collective unconscious and a deeper sensitivity happening right now with our natural connection that if we are, that is already there. That's not something you can get rid of. It's there and it's heightened. But what are you consuming? How are you even participating in the healing of the collective unconscious right now? If you are listening to things and maybe you aren't realizing it. I know I've done the same thing. This is through like me, I've caught myself. I'm like, ugh, like why am I watching so many crime series stuff? Like I love it. I have a fascination with it, but like what is this doing to me whenever there's no moderation and what is this feeding into the collective? Is this really beneficial for not just myself, but for everyone? So there's even this call because we're needing to remember our connection, and those kind of things can be destabilizing and keep us in this kind of Virgo Lucifer dynamic linked with the Saturn Neptune conjunction of fear and anxiety and destabilization, right? Um, I really find this new moon profound and gorgeous, and yet almost sorrowful because it's like these are things that are innate about us, and yet there's this cry and this plea reflected in this chart of, can you remember? Do you remember? Like the ocean remembers, like your consciousness remembers. I hope you all have a beautiful Pisces new moon, and I hope that messages are received and a remembrance is had, and it's reflected in the sky right now. A call to remember. Happy Pisces new moon. Until next time.